Reports, featuring Command Combat Civil War. Today we are doing the Battle of Wilson's Creek, which is oftentimes referred to as the Bull Run of the West. It's the first major battle of the Western theater in the Civil War. And essentially what was going on is Missouri was supposed to be a neutral state, but it was oftentimes starting to side with the Confederacy. In fact, the governor was leaning towards the Confederacy. And so General Lyon, I call him Leon, it might be Lyon, it's Lyon. Anyway, he was known as the red-haired general. He had the bright red hair, and he basically was not going to allow them to form armies in Missouri the way they were in Virginia. And so he took his own army in there, and at that time it was small, it was really the size of a division. Went in there and pushed them out, and the governor himself was retreating along with a lot of men who were trying to form an army, but he just basically would stay right on their heels and not allow them to form up. Well, they got to this place near Wilson's Creek. One of these is Wilson's Creek. Anyway, basically a branch in the creek, and and the generals there were forming up. You had General Price and General McCulloch, and the two of them were trying to form a couple of armies. Of course, they hadn't completely worked out command themselves, but you had essentially McCulloch's small group, and you had Price's small group, and in many cases, they had not even formed up to the point where they had regulated, uniforms, regulated weapons. I mean, some people were just bringing their own guns, shotguns, pitchforks, whatever they might have, and, whatever uniforms they might have. So really, they had not had a chance really to form up, and they were trying to, at this particular place, they were basically setting camp to make this sort of their rebel base, and Leon was right on their heels and was going to try to hit them with his division. Now he was doing it with his main force right there, and he had a brigade under Siegel, I sometimes have difficulty with pronunciation. Anyway, he was a German commander coming around this way, and here's what was interesting about his brigade is it was oftentimes made up of Germans who didn't even speak English, and so they would give orders to one another in German, and if Siegel fell, they would have difficulty getting another commander. It would have to be somebody within their brigade to take command because there was nobody else who could speak to his men. Anyway, he had sent Siegel's men around to the back to hit the Confederates from the rear, but of course he's so far off to the flank that he might not have an effect. And so you have the main army right here coming in, the other army coming in from that side. We're going to see how it goes. This is the game of Wilson's Creek. The first turn is already seeing action. The Federals have taken their cavalry and swung around the flank here and hit the Confederate cavalry. That has caused them to retreat, and they are running back that way. They took advantage of their success, continued to charge, and caused more Confederate cavalry to retreat. They are really doing successful, but then the Confederate infantry pulled up along their side, hit them, and caused them to retreat themselves. However, they still do have one stand left. They're not quite routing. They somehow survived that, but actually a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Confederate infantry is pretty much all green, and they are using improvised weapons and having all kinds of weird special rules for each one because they are really, militia is even being kind to what they are at this particular point. They've barely formed into a military group. But anyway, they have stalled the Confederate cavalry from running over all of them. Now they're pulling back, but you can see those casualties there. And they have taken care of a lot of the Confederate cavalry. There is still a little bit left there forming up with Price. However, actually they can't quite be formed up yet because, as you'll notice, the Confederates are in disorder all along their line at both camps. The reason is because this was a surprise attack. The Confederates were not expecting them. They didn't know where they were, where the Federals were at this point, and so their attack took them by surprise. They were unable to form up. As such, they were unable to form up and charge the the Union cavalry, which is why they did that attack on the first turn. But now they're going to be able to form up this next turn, getting themselves into order, so watch for that being sort of the Confederate line. And over here, the Federals made a little bit of an advance with their cavalry and with their infantry. They're starting to move up there, and the Confederates over here under McCulloch are starting to get themselves ready. But again, they cannot form during the first turn because they are completely in disorder. They were not expecting an attack, and basically they're all running around the camps right now, getting their weapons and getting into lines and stuff. I mean, putting them into lines at the beginning of the game is really almost more representative because really, in truth, they're just all inside of the camps, and the first turn represents them kind of running around, getting themselves in order, which is why the cavalry was able to run over the Confederates Confederate cavalry so effective during that first turn. But now we will see. Turn 2 saw everyone starting to jockey for positions. The Confederates got themselves set up in their lines, got themselves into order, preparing themselves for the Federals moving in on them. They've gotten in position on those woods there. The Federals are moving up over that hill. There's been some fire traded over here, neither one taking any damage. However, over here, the Confederate artillery has taken some damage from this artillery. This Federal artillery that was moving around here has gotten itself set up, just as the cavalry moved up behind them. And in firing, they did some damage. Bear in mind, the Federal artillery actually is typically better than the Confederate artillery, and especially at this particular time, because the Confederates are just kind of grabbing whatever they can and throwing it together. And so their crews are all green. Some of the Federal artillery is already standard because they've been trained a lot more, and this is just militia. The Confederates are holding together. Anyway, Price is over there with his cavalry. McCullough is set up with his artillery, which is firing down there and has caused that cavalry to pull back. And meanwhile, they are shaking up that Federal infantry moving up. The Federal artillery has gotten set up and is sending some fire over there at the Confederate infantry that is setting up. Notice also over here, Confederate infantry is in march column, moving around to this side. So we'll see them trying to maybe do some flanking action. And now the Confederates are getting aggressive, especially over here, where they have switched to a red order. Now, they don't have a corps commander. In this particular one, the Confederates start in blue order, and only if you have a corps commander can you automatically switch orders. However, if the division commander rolls his initiative, he can switch, and he has, and he's changed it to red, and so he's moved his infantry out of the woods and into the faces of the Federals who are coming into their own woods. And over here, they met them right in face-to-face in the woods there. Neither one charged, and the Confederates also pulled up another one on their flank, and so there was just a lot of firing going on there. The Confederates have had to pull back. However, they have Price right there to rally them. The Federals have pulled back there. They do not have anybody to rally them. Leon is over here. Meanwhile, over here, there's also fire being traded back and forth, but there's not quite as much damage. They're just kind of shooting back and forth each other, scaring at one another, trying to bring up reinforcements, but pretty much separate from that other one that's going on right over there, or at least a little bit separate. Meanwhile, the artillery over here has fired over here and silenced the Confederate artillery. That means that the crew has kind of abandoned their guns, so they're not able to fire back. The Confederates are bringing up more reinforcements there. And it looks like that brigade of the Federals is in real big trouble because they got flanked on this side, they're about to get flanked on that side, and they're getting hit from the front. So it's pretty severe for them over there. Meanwhile, the Confederates over here still have these two artillery pieces. One of them has gotten hit by the Federal artillery, which seems to be sniper artillery. The Federals, meanwhile, have pulled their cavalry back behind there. They got hit, losing one of the stands, and decided to pull their guys back here. Meanwhile, their infantry is pulled into the woods to say, hey, let's guard against here. And it looks like this particular flank of the Federals may be stopping, since this entire division of the Confederates have turned to face them. Now, the artillery this time the Federal artillery this time fired at the Confederate cavalry, actually took a stand of damage and pulled back, and that put the other cavalry into disorder, and so that's going to hurt their plan. I think their plan may have been to bring the bring the cavalry over on this side while the infantry goes on this side. However, they're not going to be able to charge anyway, not until they get this blue order changed. So at this particular point, no matter what the Confederates do, they're not going to be able to go after them. All they can do is be distracted by Sigel's flank march. Moving on, and the Federals have created a line on which to defend the hill, which is a curious thing to say considering that they are on the offense, but the Confederates have been so aggressive that they've had to set up themselves in this defensive situation. They have their artillery at the top of the hill, their infantry set up here, and it has been successful. They have pushed back this Confederate brigade, and this one as well on the side. That unit that's been over here isolated the Federals won that little bout, especially because they got the artillery up there. They're pushing those brigades back. However, the Confederates have reset themselves up here, or they've gotten themselves into order, so that brigade's going to be ready, and they got another brigade over there on their flank. Price is barely holding on to his horse because he almost got hit. They got a 9 on the roll to possibly hit him. And so he's just barely holding on there. The artillery's firing over there at that brigade that's coming up behind them, and they've got an artillery piece there that they're screening, actually. The Federals can't hit him, but the artillery cannot hit back at them. They also have some cavalry moving around there, kind of dangling out there, but is not going to be able to be fired at by the Confederate artillery. Meanwhile, over here, it's very curious. You'll notice there's only one artillery piece, and McCullough is on the ground. He actually got hit. We're determining this is sniper artillery. They keep rolling ones, which is the best you can do when firing, and took out that artillery and McCullough. So he is not going to be able to switch to a red order, so these Confederates out here are not going to be able to be aggressive the way they had hoped. The best they're going to be able to do is set up and defend as they're actually supposed to. The Federals, meanwhile, have moved some cavalry over to here, so watch for them possibly being on the Confederate flank. And so this battle is really getting interesting. And now it continues to get worse for the Confederates. Their unit over here, the brigade over here, pulled back into the woods. The firing back has caused this Union brigade to go into disorder, but they haven't lost any men. This brigade, meanwhile, has. It went into those woods there, tried to go up against that huge line of Federals, and they lost a little bit and didn't put a dent into that big Union line. Meanwhile, this brigade over here, this was the big Confederate brigade, came charging at this artillery, said, hey, we're going to take that. This Federal infantry got themselves into order just in time, and they set themselves up. Actually, that Confederate charge would have worked because this Federal infantry brigade was in disorder and facing the wrong way. But lucky for the Federals, their card came up first, just in time. They got themselves into order. Actually, Leon has pretty good initiative, so that is less surprising. Anyway, they got themselves into order just in time for the Confederate charge. The Confederates started to charge anyway. They went at the artillery, and anytime infantry is within an inch of the artillery, that means they're supporting, so they go in to defend it. And they won the charge, pushing the Confederates back. And then the Federal cavalry charge onto the Confederate flank, managed to knock out a few more of them, caused them to pull back even more, and then we're hidden behind them to keep from that artillery fire during the fire phase. So, Federals are successfully defending this hill, which historically was called Bloody Hill because so many people got destroyed there, particularly the Federals, but they are holding. Actually, in the historical battle, Leon got shot down. And we're kind of seeing what happens when Leon does not get shot down, because he's continuing to rally all of his men all along the line and keeping them there. And this may have been the way it would have worked out historically, because the Confederates did go on the attack, did attack them on Bloody Hill, and the Federals folded, but it was mostly because their bold leader was taken down. And so this is kind of it if they don't go down. Look at this. The they're holding the Confederates back, knocking them down, knocking trees down. It is just mass hysteria. I'm not sure what's going on with this tree. Anyway, all right, so they are holding there. Meanwhile, over here, this Confederate brigade has taken over command. They are still blue. Now they have to roll a 1 to be able to change their order, and they're not getting it, but they are getting up to the edge of those woods there and there to go in after that one infantry brigade of the Federals. So, if they can change to red order, those Federals might be hurt. However, they do have this cavalry that's right over here. Meanwhile, this artillery is trying to fire over here. You'll notice the cavalry is gone. The Confederate cavalry is now moving over. See what they can do over here. However, bear in mind, they are still subject to that blue order and will continue to be. Even if they change, the new order will only go at 15 inches per turn. So, this cavalry will stay at in blue order until further notice. And that'll do it for the battle. There were a couple of major charges that took place this turn. Let's first look at this one over here. You may remember that this Confederate infantry was at the edge of the woods here, getting ready to go into a charge at these Federals along with their fellow brigade, but they couldn't get the red order that they wanted, so they were still stuck there pointing into the woods when the cavalry came along and hit them in the flank, causing them to pull back, taking a lot of casualties as they went, and so that was going to hurt them over there. Although the Federal cavalry also took some damage over there, didn't have a lot to take. But what really mattered was over here. The Federal long line of infantry that you saw up there, that big brigade, Leon was right behind him, and he just went, you know what, boys, let's go in there and charge. Charged down the hill, just ran over that Confederate brigade, the remainder of the brigade that was there, sending the survivors running and killing Price while they were there. And that is the last of the Confederate generals, plus they have taken a lot of casualties, so they've pretty much taken the numbers they needed for the Federal victory, especially since they are green. That's going to cause them just to run into the woods. And the Confederates in the western part of the theater are basically going to be retreating. The one group they really had left that was unhurt were these. Well, even this cavalry took a little bit of casualties, but at least they are fresh for the moment. But anyway, it's pretty much broken up. You can see the Federals are pretty much still set up and in order, and the Confederates are sent running, and their generals are gone. So that'll do it with a Federal victory at long last. They've lost a lot of them this year, but this one they pulled out, the last one for the year. So that'll do it for us here at Command Combat Battle Reports. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to tell your friends and subscribe. And happy gaming, everybody!